One of the biggest concerns going into the second Trump presidency is, will the deep state try to undermine him? What is that? To help me go through that, I have Adam Lovinger. Adam, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So, you've worked with the government in very varying capacities. You are also the author of The Insider Threat: How the Deep State Undermines America from Within. I want to go through some concerns that I have, help my audience understand what the deep state is. Are you familiar with Mike Benz? He was the head of cybersecurity during the Trump administration.
Yeah, I've heard of his name. I've never met Mike, but we do have mutual colleagues in common.
Okay. I just finished earlier today an interview between he and Joe Rogan. And I mean, for 2.5 hours, he just talked about this octopus in Washington, D.C. that has its tentacles in everything. So help me and my audience understand this vague idea of a deep state. What really is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that at the outset, Stephen, because I think it's very important just for our credibility to really define the deep state when we talk about it. Unfortunately, there is no one definition. People talk about the deep state as being this very broad thing to include the entire administrative state or the whole, U.S. national security bureaucracy. In the very first pages of the book, define it very narrowly. And I actually take a definition from the New York Times of all places, and the definition that I use and what I saw inside the Pentagon and the U.S. National Security Council is a collaboration between civilian and military officials working within the government to undermine our democracy. And what I mean by that is really undermining the rule of law, collaborating with America's adversaries, making the U.S. government less responsive to the American people, a very subversive thing. And I think that one thing that sort of sets my book out from others is really just the firsthand knowledge I have of a genuine, deep collaboration with unelected officials inside the U.S. national security bureaucracy and America's principal adversaries, namely the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians. A collaboration to undermine America from within.
Interesting. Okay. You wouldn't think that would be the case. You would think America from the inside would always have America first and looking out for us. But is this part of like playing fair on the global stage, or is this about people and their ego getting in the way and allowing foreign influence to influence them?
Yeah, it's sort of a long story, but I'll give you a quick one. And if there's certain aspects of what I'm saying that you want to dive deeper, just please let me know. So in a nutshell, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Western intelligence got access to a lot of the KGB archives and a lot of our adversaries' intelligence archives. And what we discovered is that during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had pretty much penetrated every major American organization there is, including our national security bureaucracy, intensively. And they had stolen lots of secrets, lots of technology, lots of war plans. They pretty much knew everything we were doing, but they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't take that knowledge and put it to use because their system was so rotten. And so what they have decided to do, sort of in Soviet U.S. competition 2.0 or, Russian competition 2.0. And mind you, the Chinese and the Iranians do this as well, is that they are working very hard. America's adversaries recognize they can't take America on head first. That is sort of a death wish. And it just doesn't work historically. I mean, look what happened to the Nazis and to Imperial Japan. We just decimated them. And, we kind of did the same thing to the Soviets, but a little bit more indirectly. But, we did decimate them. And so they've come to the conclusion, and our adversaries' intelligence services put enormous resources into corrupting America from within, going into and undermining our universities, getting involved in our think tanks and infusing, money in there and trying to sort of, convince people to take various policy decisions that are conducive to their interests. But even more so, they're really injecting their people, fellow travelers, people that believe that America is an imperialist, racist, hegemonic oppressor. You see these Ivy League universities of all these protests, and they're pro-Hamas, anti-American protests. These are American elites at Ivy League universities who do then go into our national security bureaucracy and think America's a bad place. And they've actually adopted the ideology of America's enemies and are working to achieve equity, in part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion construct, to achieve some sort of equity. Let's cut America down a bit. And there's so much evidence of this, Stephen. And I try to put some of that into the book as to how America's enemies, they've realized they have to get insiders to do their dirty work for them because their old approach to competing with America wasn't sufficient.
Okay. So would it be fair to say universities would be like the ideal area to infiltrate, because people would go into government, they would also go into maybe public school teaching, and now you're disseminating information up and down?
Yeah. And you really nailed it. There is this very concerted effort, and in 2022, the Washington Post had an article, essentially reporting on a leak from a U.S. intelligence document that showed that Vladimir Putin had decided that really he needs to focus as the sharp tip of his active measure campaign around the world on this sort of infiltration and getting inside our institutions, various Western governments, getting political parties, in Western Europe and other parts of Europe to do his bidding for them. And this goes back in some respects to the year 1917, and you have Leon Trotsky in New York City, working with various groups to propagate the Soviet ideology, their vision. And so this is a long time running. A lot of American institutions have experienced this. There's many books on this. But I think that where my book is somewhat different and adds to our knowledge is that it's reached such a level that you genuinely have saboteurs inside the U.S. national security bureaucracy. And, it's quite clear. I mean, I just talk about one office, which is the highest level strategy office in the Pentagon, called the Office of Net Assessment. And what is this office, doing? It's led by its leaders, have adopted America's enemies policies for their own. The director said, losing Taiwan to China is not an insult to U.S. national interests. Well, that's what Xi Jinping says. And that's what the director of this high-level strategy office is. They're also actively involved in minimizing the threats posed to America by our adversaries. And thirdly, this office, whose objective is to craft the net assessments that lead to national security strategies to ensure that America wins our wars, the most fundamental important thing the Defense Department does, they're not even doing their job. They haven't crafted net assessments in over a decade. So there's this genuine sort of sabotage from within. And the purpose of the book is to shine a light on this. We're not losing our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for no reason at all. There's a real reason there. And it's because there is this sabotage. And what happened to President Trump the first time around, with the Russiagate hoax and all these spurious investigations, what happened to my boss at the National Security Council, General Mike Flynn, what happened to me is that these saboteurs inside our national security bureaucracy, allied with America's enemies, are taking out the Trump people because they know that Trump and the people that he is bringing in, the America First, agenda, to put America's interest first, not our adversaries' interest first, America's interest first, we're very threatening to the deep state, to these saboteurs. And so, this is yet another indicator, the intensity of the attack that the deep state unleashed against Trump and his officials, is a real testament to that.
Okay. I don't know if this would be a good example or a bad example, but an example where near the end of Trump's presidency, we learn that General Mark Milley commits to China that if Trump is going to secretly make a move on China in his final days, that he would basically sound an alarm and let his counterpart in China know that we were going to attack. Is that an example of somebody from within allowing the feelings and the ideology of an outside foreign entity to dictate the way that they behave towards their own country? I hate to say this, but the US dollar isn't as strong as it used to be. And our government is the number one reason why. Under Joe Biden, the dollar has lost 26% of its buying power. You feel it. I feel it. We're all feeling it. Meanwhile, inflation is still out of control and the cost of everything is up. But so is gold and silver. Think about this. If you had to bet in 20 years from now, what will be worth more, the US dollar or gold? I'm going with gold, which is why I have them as one of my sponsors. Colonial Metals Group is the group that I trust to help my friends, my clients, you guys, to understand gold and buy gold and silver. They are professional. They are good listeners. They are also good educators. So if you have an IRA, did you know that you can now buy gold and silver in a self-directed IRA, and they can help you with that? I really believe in the power of gold and silver. In fact, last night I had dinner with a very successful financial planner. I asked him, do you guys just push stocks and mutual funds, or do you ever talk about gold and silver? He said, we always give exposure to gold and silver to our clients. So this is not something new, but it may be something new to you. Now, we've put together a special offer for our audience. You can get a safe and up to $7,500 of free silver by reaching out and becoming a client of Colonial Metals Group. Check this out. I want you to call 800-807-2143 or go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/Stephen-Gardner. I will leave that link down below to make it easy.
That's a great question, Stephen. And what I report in the book is really the systemic evidence that's been backed up by many, many data points. I don't know precisely what Mark Milley was talking about. I probably read what you read, and nonetheless, it's consistent with everything that I've seen. It's consistent with, in some respects, triangulating with America's adversaries against America. I use one example in the book about how Obama and Hillary Clinton really triangulated with Putin against their Republican presidential adversaries. So in 2012, we have Barack Obama caught on a hot mic talking to Russian President Dmitry Medvedev saying, listen, I got this upcoming election I have to win. Give me some space. Give me some space. Don't press me so hard on missile defense. After I win the election, I will have more flexibility to pay you back. And so it's like, wait a minute, here you have Obama triangulating with the Russian leadership against Mitt Romney. I mean, it's like, this is pretty damn bad. And of course, Hillary Clinton, who, engaged in projection, claiming that Trump was collaborating with the Russians, she relied upon Russian disinformation to generate the Steele dossier as part of her hit against Trump. It was a total hoax, as we know. The U.S. Department of Justice, ran this thing to ground and said there was absolutely no collaboration between Trump and the Russians. But it's Hillary who's genuinely using Russian intelligence officers to fabricate disinformation that gets inserted into the Steele dossier that then gets, used to, justify the attacks, the FISA surveillance of Americans, spying on the Trump campaign, all of these attacks leading to the Mueller investigation, a 3-year-long investigation that ties the Trump White House in knots. This is the Russians getting precisely what they want. They didn't, just by stealing secrets in the Cold War, they didn't get very far. but by triangulating with these Democrats to undermine their Republican counterparts. I mean, and they don't care about who's the Democrats, who's the Republican. They just want to destroy America from within. And so if they got some willing collaborators, whether it's the deep state or Obama or Hillary, they'll take whoever can help them.
Okay. You mentioned Trump having issues in his first term. You mentioned General Michael Flynn. How did they come after you? Help me understand that.
Yeah, so I had been working with Mike Flynn for about a decade before he tapped me to be his senior director for strategic assessments on the U.S. National Security Council. And I was in the highest level strategy office at the Pentagon. General Flynn was in battlefield intelligence in Iraq and Afghanistan, deployed all over the world, mostly out Iraq and Afghanistan. What General Flynn and I observed from these two very different vantage points was the same thing. We observed that America's military, both in uniform and civilian, were not focused on winning these wars. Instead, they were focused on enriching their contractor friends in the private industry. There's a lot of money that can be made in wars, but also, building bureaucratic empires. And we saw this, internal rot, building and building and building. And of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We horribly lost. We spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we liberated Afghanistan from the Taliban. And then after we'd been there 20 years, we put the Taliban back in place. But we left $80 billion worth of weapons for them under Joe Biden. And so General Flynn and I saw this internal rot. We've been talking about this for over a decade, Stephen. You look at great powers historically, whether it's the Roman Empire, British Empire, great powers, France, in the 19th century, then collapsing in the 20th century. The one constant to great powers that fall from power and into the dustbin of history is not some sort of overstretch, like they, got too involved externally. It's the internal rot. And so General Flynn and I, we identified this internal rot. We also identified how when you have this rot, when you have this corruption, it's like catnip for our enemies. Our enemies, they see, look, America's not working the way it's supposed to be. There's corruption. The laws aren't being enforced. We can insinuate ourselves into this. And so you get this, and they're quite sophisticated at it. They don't necessarily do it, head on. They'll sort of, just create institutional incentive structures that promote our enemies' policy objectives and undermine us from within. General Milley may very well not have even been fully conscious of what he was saying, the implications of what he was saying. But I do think that the sheer fact that he could give our enemy a warning if the duly elected president of the United States, decided it was time to, start a war, the sheer fact of that, I believe, is just an indicator of how entrenched, in many ways, our enemy's thinking has become within our, for lack of a better word, the deep state in the United States.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's hard to ever know what another human being is really thinking because so many different things make up the filters that we take information through. But one of the key talking points of President Trump is, I want to drain the swamp. The swamp in Washington, D.C. is deeper than I expected, more rotten than I expected. With the team that he's assembled now, do you believe he'll be able to make progress? I mean, he's trying to, set people up to have a different approach with the Pentagon. He's trying to have somebody he believes will reform the FBI. The Department of Education, they want to abolish. DOGE, cleaning up systems and budgets. What are your thoughts on the team that he has built?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I know some better than others. Kash Patel is first rate. He really understands how the deep state operates. He really gets it. He's had many important jobs, in the Department of Justice, in the Defense Department, as well as in Congress. So we've seen the congressional side. He was one of the lead investigators for Devin Nunes, who genuinely uncovered the whole Russia hoax and just was like an attack dog and just went straight for the evidence. It's like, we're going to get this evidence no matter what. And so I think that that's a great choice. I don't know Pete Hegseth very well. John Ratcliffe, who's been tapped to head CIA, is first rate. He's one of the most articulate and knowledgeable U.S. officials on how America's enemies, principally the Chinese, insinuate themselves into American institutions, including our bureaucracy, to just create incentive structures to promote their interests and undermine us. He's very articulate on this. He knows it extremely well. He was he was the director of national intelligence previously. Some of the others I don't know, but I think it's important to look at, what's the overall trajectory of Trump's cabinet choices. They're really hard-hitting outsiders. They're not status quo, Washington swamp creatures. If they've been in Washington, they've been fighting this corruption and this institutional ossification. And if they're outsiders, they bring this, fresh approach, like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They really bring an outside approach to inject, new ideas into how do we, manage our governance. And so, the initial indicators are very positive, all in all. And of course, we'll see what the results are. But one thing that I've learned to admire about Trump that is different from many American presidents is that he does self-correct. If there's something not working, he very quickly changes. I mean, he fired a lot of people. He went through many cabinet officials. He will not keep them around if they're not doing their job. And he learns, and he's a learner, and he holds people to account. And I think that we will inevitably see some churn as the problem gets more comes more into focus because the deep state hides in the shadows. I mean, this is a very shadowy, sinister operation in lockstep with the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, and they're playing for keeps. I have a chapter 23 in my books where I reveal for the first time a murder of a high-level U.S. government official on the Department of Defense facility that was covered up as a suicide. And I ran this evidence to ground. It was confirmed by the Alexandria Police Department. The deep state is a murderous enterprise. They operate like America's most, ferocious adversaries, and they'll kill people and cover it up as a suicide. So this is not the deep state is not just Trump's crazy talk, as Washington Post writer David Ignatius calls it. It's a very serious, real thing.
Yeah. Wow. I've had a lot of guests on that seem to have this focal point. And maybe that's because I bring on a lot of conservative and libertarian-minded people. But it seems like as I get talking with different guests and experts, it almost always bottlenecks at Barack Obama. Do you believe that Obama's presidency changed America in many ways, as far as the way that he behaved with foreign leaders, the way he presented American strength on the global stage?
Wow. My book is the answer to your question, Stephen. My book is all about that, frankly. And what I saw, I saw this for the entire 8 years of Barack Obama. I worked in the highest level strategy office of the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon. I saw what he was doing. And I also got to, read our intelligence as to how do our adversaries respond to this. What I can tell you is America's adversaries thought that Obama was working for them. And that's not actually much of a secret. And the reason why is if you go back and you look at his presidency, in 2009, his first year as president, Obama traversed the world and he apologized for America as an oppressor, as a sort of an imperialist state, as a country that went abroad and harmed non-Western peoples. And he apologized for our democratic allies, and he apologized for the West generally. The American people, as polling showed at the time, did not appreciate a president of the United States going abroad, including to France, where hundreds of thousands of Americans in continental Europe, paid for, Western democracy and freedom with their lives twice in the last century. It was extremely insulting. Obama misread the American people. So what did he do? Instead of engaging in a discussion with the American people, saying, you know what, I think you're this way, and these are problems. Let's sort this out. Let's do what the founders in the Federalist Papers or the Constitution, sort of like the architects of America's constitutional order. Instead of having this open discussion and talking about America's role in the world, and even trying to encourage Americans to adopt, different approaches. And this is, a presidential tradition. Instead of having this national discussion and, attempting to bring American people over to his side, he turned inward. And what did he do? He chose to advance this policy of American diminishment, cutting America down to size, subversively, internally. And my book is genuinely all about that. All the ways he did that. Primarily, he adopted essentially a strategy from a early Italian Marxist, early 20th century Marxist named Antonio Gramsci, the war for position. You can change an entire democracy by transforming its institutions. You create what's called the new cultural hegemony. You create these DEI programs. You inject critical race theory, and all of this is actually for the purpose is to in some respects promote the talking points of our enemies, because that's if you look at Russian strategic documents, and I lay this out in the book, they're all about creating international equity, cutting America down to size, raising up Russia so there's more, equality in the world. Obama essentially took this, critical race theory, DEI worldview, and he applied it to America, and it's a very subversive thing. In 2015, when Hillary Clinton was on the campaign trail for her own run at the presidency, she admitted to this. She was quoted as saying, I believe it was maybe in CNN or perhaps maybe Fox, she was quoted as saying, "I don't believe you change hearts and minds. I believe you change laws. You change the allocation of resources. You change the way systems operate." So you adopt this internal approach. You change America by taking over our administrative state and using that for your own ideological objectives, not to respond to what the American people want, but to respond to his ideology, what I call the Obama Doctrine, to advance that. And I saw that firsthand, Stephen. It was very flagrant inside the Pentagon, and it's caused tremendous damage.
Wow. I've heard a couple of things from guests and people that I've spoken with. There's a lot of Americans that say, "Oh, I voted for Obama because I thought he would be this change agent, young, a different perspective. We needed to get away from George W. Bush and things like that." And then they're completely disappointed in the presidency. And then you hear, okay, the American people sent Washington, D.C. the biggest middle finger they could, named Donald J. Trump. And, then they just crashed down on him to try to stop him from unraveling what Obama has tried to put in place. Do you feel like the pendulum is swinging back away from DEI and critical race theory and the Obama doctrine that was laid down during his 8 years?
Well, I really hope so, Stephen. It's my gut tells me yes. I do think that the election of Donald Trump, I mean, I know I'm a Republican. I voted for him twice, but I also know many Democrats who voted for him for the first time because they're like, you know what, this Obama doctrine, this worldview, this slicing and dicing Americans based on race, constantly, and just all of these this political correctness and the cancel culture, it's so fundamentally un-American. I mean, I grew up in a very liberal household in Eugene, Oregon, which is about as liberal, politically as Berkeley, California. But even in primary school, public primary school, I mean, I learned about the brilliance of the founders and the Judeo-Christian traditions, and how they leveraged the wisdom of the British Enlightenment to create a very sophisticated constitutional republic, and I revered that, and I do think that there are many Americans, most Americans, who feel the same way, and that this racial fixation that just is so un-American is there's something very sinister about it, and we don't need to be preached to as Americans as to how we should treat people based on their skin color. It's really beneath us. But it does seem that Obama and his ilk, they wanted to weaponize this, and they certainly didn't help minorities. I mean, minorities did not do so well under Barack Obama. What few people know is that of all of the ethnic groups in America that flourished under Donald Trump, the ethnic group that made the greatest gains under Donald Trump economically were African Americans. But you will not hear that from the corporate left-wing media. So I think you're right. I think that Americans are sick of being told that they're racist and they need to focus on skin color and just move on from that.
Well, I mean, just sticking with skin color, in 2016, Trump wins 8% of the black vote. In 2020, 16%, now about 30%. So, you can call them racist all day long and say that Black Americans didn't do well, but they sure felt that way as the pendulum was swinging back towards a more conservative president, a stronger, what they believe is a stronger president that will stand up for families and for our country. Adam, this has been a great conversation. I want to put a direct link to your book down below, The Insider Threat, How the Deep State Undermines America from Within. Thank you for your service to the country. Are you involved with government now, or have you moved on?
Well, I'm here to help. As long as I have any breath left in my lungs, I will fight for the United States of America and all the ideals that our constitutional republic stands for. I don't have anything settled up in stone for serving in this administration, but I will continue to fight. I have 3 beautiful children who I need to make sure that they inherit a country that is worthy of the name.
Great. Yep. I've got 3 as well. So I hear you. Well, thank you so much. I'll put a direct link down below. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen.